Hey, my name is TJ. I'm a young person in long-term recovery. For me, that means I haven't had a drink or a drug since August 9th, 2016.
Nice.
I'm here hosting a Recovery Matters podcast with...
I'm Leeroy Ferrer. I learned about this podcast through my mom. She's coming on 20 years clean now. I've personally been sober since February of last year, just over a year now.
Tell me about that, how you wanted to come on the podcast because your mom?
I was asking her a little about her story, and she was like, you can go and see it on YouTube on the podcast. So I went and watched it, and I ended up learning some new things about her that I didn't know. Like, she shared, some of her story with me, but she got into real detail on the podcast, and I said, oh, that's pretty neat. I said, that's something I could see myself doing when I'm ready. This has been a long time in the making. I've been putting it off, saying, when I'm ready, and I think now's the time.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about your story. Tell me what life was like for you growing up.
First of all, I was born in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico.
Okay.
From there, I came to the United States at about, I want to say maybe 2-3 years old. I was still in diapers. From there, we went to the Bronx, New York. From there, we came to Connecticut. Growing up for me, I grew up in a dysfunctional household, mom, dad, uncle, aunt, grandma. Everybody in the household was either using drugs, selling drugs, or a combination of the both.
Yep.
So I grew up watching this, and I didn't know I was living in a dysfunctional household until the first time I spent the night at a friend's house. And I remember like looking around and feeling like his house was weird, like I was like, you don't got people coming in and out your house all hours of the day, like they was eating dinner at the table together as a family. I felt weird. I was like, and after a couple more experiences like that is when I figured it out, like, hold on, something is wrong with my household.
You were like over those people's houses, like, where's all the chaos?
Yeah, like they had a like a family, knit thing going on. Like I said, the dinner at the table, prayer. I didn't have any of these things at my house, so I was like, I don't know if first time I felt like they was doing some type of ritual or something. I was like, what's going on here?
Tell me about your first experience with drugs and alcohol.
My very, very first experience was, I think I was about 8-9 years old, and it was at a birthday party, and between my father and my uncle, who passed away recently, they would put a little bit of alcohol in my drink and one of my cousins' drink. We were about the same age, and they would basically spike our drink. And they thought, I don't know why they thought it was cool or whatever the case was. We're the only two young kids running around the birthday party lit.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I remember them doing the piñata, and all the kids get on the ground and start collecting candy, and we're just wilding, you know what I mean? And other parents are looking at us like, what's wrong with these two kids? Like, they lit. What you mean?
Did it take off from there?
No, alcohol really didn't become a problem for me until later on.
Okay.
Yes. My main drug of choice was marijuana.
Yep.
And it started off as me selling it at 16 years old.
Okay.
And one day I was in a circle of friends who all knew I didn't smoke. At this time, I was very athletic. I was point guard in the basketball team at school. I used to box at the local gym. Used to play football, all of this house. So I was all athletic, and I used to hustle.
Yep.
I mean, that's basically what I knew. And one day being in this circle, I remember they were passing the blunt around, and one of my friends, he must have been really high. So he went to go pass the blunt to me. And then that's when all the other friends started laughing and looked at him and said, yo, man, you really high, man. You know Leeroy don't smoke. And they was like, oh, man, I'm sorry. He went to go pass it to the next person. And out of curiosity, I was like, you know what? Let me see. And it was like, man, you don't smoke. I said, but let me, you know what I mean? I remember taking like 2 or 3 hits and feeling very paranoid.
Okay.
I just felt like everybody in the circle was looking at me, like they were laughing at me. And my first experience was like I said, it was paranoid.
Yeah.
And little by little, it advanced pretty quickly, especially since I was selling it. Before you know it, I became my best customer.
Yep. And things went downhill.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that.
Over the next few years, I continued to smoke marijuana. Alcohol was more of a like partying thing for me. I would have to be around people. It would be like a weekend, maybe clubbing around people, preferably some females. Music, had to have music. But marijuana, I could I could smoke by myself. You know, I didn't have to have nobody around. And at a certain time, I preferred to smoke by myself, right? Because if I smoke by myself, I don't have to share with nobody.
Yep.
But alcohol was never like that at the beginning, you know, like I had to be around other people. That now looking back at it, I noticed that I lost a lot of opportunities due to marijuana, you know.
Yeah.
Not showing up to places on time, showing up to work late, not performing at my best at work because I'm high, coming to work smelling like weed, not thinking nobody smells it. Of course they smell it. And as I look back on it now, I said, wow, I lost a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
But everything happens for a reason. And what made me want to quit both, and I did both at the same time, was I became an extreme procrastinator smoking weed. Like I would put things off. I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, I could have a list of 10 things to do. If I got 1 or 2 things, that was a lot. The rest of the stuff I'll do tomorrow. And so procrastination, spending a lot of money. I remember a defining moment for me. My daughter's 6 years old now. I have a 6-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. I remember her asking me for something, and it was something relatively inexpensive, right? And I remember telling her that I couldn't buy whatever it was because I didn't have the money. But yeah, I'm working. You know, I should have the money, right? And there was no reason for me to tell her no. You know, it's not like she was misbehaving or didn't deserve it or anything like that. And I remember her looking at me with that little cute face and those eyes and just asking me why. She said, but why, Dada? And I just was like, I don't have it. No, I didn't have it. And when she took off, I sat there and pondered on it. And I remember feeling really low. You know, I just remember asking myself, like, why? Why don't you have it? You should have it. You know what I mean? And I started crying. And I knew that at that moment, the seed had been planted. You know, I had made a conscious decision at that time that this wasn't for me.
Yes.
You know, like I'm spending a lot of money, simple things that I should be able to have, you know, like purchasing things for around the house, things of that nature. Like I wasn't able to do because I'd get my check. The very, very first thing I do was make sure I have my money for my weed aside. And after that, gas money, insurance, things of that nature, and whatever was left over at that point then would go towards the house, right? And I didn't feel like a man, you know. So that I already knew. I had already made a decision in my mind, like, you know what? Maybe this is not for you, you know. And as far as alcohol goes, I grew up watching my dad beat the bricks off my mom.
Yep.
My mom is about 5'4", if that, and my dad is like 6'1", 6'2".
Okay.
And at this time, he was really, you know, built, and size 15 boots. And he would drink and get drunk, and they start arguing or whatever the case was, and he'd beat her like she was a man.
Yeah.
Like, I remember one time seeing her on the floor in a fetal position and him just kicking her and kicking her. And I remember running out of the room, going into the kitchen. I'm young at the time. Like, I remember that I knew that I was very young because I couldn't reach the counter in the kitchen. And because when I ran in there, my intention was to grab one of the knives from up on the counter, but I couldn't reach them. So he happened to have a toolbox on the floor. And the first thing I grabbed was a flathead screwdriver. That's the closest thing that I seen that was sharp and whatnot. And while he was kicking her on the floor, I remember running to him and stabbing him in the leg. And it actually punctured, because when I looked at it, it had a little blood on it. He looked over at me and he kind of snapped out of it. And I could only imagine what he had been thinking. He must have been like, what am I doing? Like I'm out of control right now, like to the point where my son comes and stabs me. He ended up stopping and walking out the door, and we didn't see him for like another 2-3 days.
Yep.
That's the main reason why I stopped drinking, because when I used to drink, sometimes I would just say things, right? Usually things that I wanted to say, right? But when
you shouldn't say,
right? But when I would start drinking, I would say these things and not really, with no filter. Like, I wouldn't care what you thought or whatever. I just get it out. And the next day I would wake up and hear, about what I said and whatnot. And so this one morning I wake up and my baby mom is looking at me weird, like she's giving me the cold shoulder walking around the house. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh man, I must have said something wild yesterday while I was drinking. So I try to, start a conversation with her. I'm like, good morning. She's just giving me the cold shoulder. And I'm like, everything okay? Like, did I say something yesterday? So she goes, oh, you don't remember? And I'm like, oh, here we go. I'm like, remember what? She goes, well, see, I knew you wasn't going to remember. So that's why I'm glad I recorded it. And I go, oh my God, what did she record? And when she showed me the recording, right? And the recording, I was getting like pushy with her.
Yep.
Right? I didn't put my hands on her. I wasn't hitting her or anything like that, but I was getting like pushy. And I didn't like what I seen in the video, because I seen that escalating.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If I'd let it, I seen that escalating, and I got a flashback of my dad beating my mom. And like I said, and the fact that I didn't remember it the next morning scared me. And I said, you know what? No, this is not for me. At this point, I had went from drinking only on the weekends with music around people to now being able to drink on a Monday, on a Tuesday, at 2:00 in the afternoon, music or no music. And that wasn't me, right? Like, I'm like, hold on, I don't drink on Tuesdays at 2:00 in the afternoon. Like, and I could see it, like, But that video was what really made me be like, nah, this is not for me. That whole day, bruh, I felt so ashamed of myself. Like, I couldn't even like really look at her in the eyes. She'd come and talk. She'd come and talk to me and ask me, and I just kind of be like, I didn't even want to look at her, right? And so I say, I'm gonna just quit both at the same time.
Okay.
And it wasn't easy.
No.
It wasn't easy, especially those first 2-3 months. I'd get especially with the weed, because I was smoking weed all day, every day.
Yep.
Monday through Sunday, from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, I was smoking weed. It was weird. Like, that's when I realized too, when I decided to quit, that I was addicted. Because the whole time I'd be like, oh, I'm not addicted. I could quit whenever I want. Just that and the third. But not having it and seeing how I was getting all moody and not wanting to deal with people, and like even my kids. So I'm like, yeah, you are addicted. And yeah, like, I remember my biggest test at the time was, physically I really don't need it, but mentally it's still a thing. And just smells and things of that nature were like really triggering. And I remember I came home, My baby mom had some of her family members and friends over, and these are people that, you know, in the past I had smoked with and drank with. And I remember it being just all kinds of bottles and just blunts galore passed around, and everybody's offering me this and that and the third. Here, hit this, here, hit my bottle, this, that. And I'm just like, no, I'm all right. I'm okay. And they were looking at me weird, like they're asking my baby mom, like, is he okay? Like, is he mad with us? Did we do something wrong? And she's like, so she's trying to explain to them, you know, this process, but it's still early on as well.
Yeah.
So she doesn't really understand it herself either, and doesn't even really at this point in time think that this is going to be a long-term thing. She just thinks it's a phase, right? That was my biggest test, I want to say, so far, because that was the first time since I decided to quit that I was around so much of it and freely, right? Like,
Yeah.
but even since then, you know, like to this day, I could walk down the street and somebody could be smoking in their car or in the cut somewhere, and I could smell the weed. Does it smell good? Yeah. But it's not triggering like it was, you know, like it's not like it doesn't give me the same thoughts, you know.
Where you get fully engrossed in it, like you would, like early on, you would smell people smoking, and you would be like, ooh.
And just like get a flashback of me
Yeah.
rolling it, sitting back,
Yep.
and just now it's just smell good. I could even tell the person like, okay, you got that loud, you ain't smoking that loud, but not really, you know, ponder on it like that.
Yes. People really don't believe me when I talk about like weed addiction and what that was like. So I had really similar experiences when I was younger. First love was smoking weed, dude. 12, 13, 14. Smoke weed every day, all day. That summer between 8th grade and ninth grade, like that high school, starting high school, we smoked literally every day with my buddies, you know, getting high and selling weed, some, you know, crap zone stuff. And like, you know, it was life, right? I was definitely fully addicted to smoking weed. Like, I don't know what I would have done without weed. And nowadays, with the high potency THC, like people are hitting those vape pens, it's like 99% smoking wax and shatter. People get stuck in that place, and then they go to quit, and it's like they have a serious mental fog. Some people, we had a guy go to the emergency room for. He was like, I'm withdrawing from smoking weed. We didn't believe him. Hospital does a urine test on him, comes back for only weed. He's like, yeah, dude, like I haven't slept in 3 days. Like I feel like, you know, my stomach hurts. There's now a new disease that so many people have like smoked weed, and it's like such a regular thing that people will get sick from smoking weed. Like they'll smoke weed and then they'll get violently ill from it. Like they'll have a terrible reaction to it. Look at the Colorado reports. Right? So deadly car crashes in Colorado are up like 10 times than what they used to be since the legalization of marijuana. You know, people make terrible choices getting behind the wheel of a car, smoking and driving. And I used to be one of those people who'd be like, oh, yeah, dude, I can smoke. You know, I haven't smoked weed in like 10 or 15 years, right? It's been so long.
Nice.
You know, I quit smoking weed long before I actually got sober because it was just expensive. You know, so it's been a long time. And like, you know, my last episode, I smoked weed. I was like ridiculously paranoid. It's like, why'd I even do this? You know, but people don't understand like marijuana is really like a very difficult thing. And like, we also live at a time where people do what they call California sober, right? So they'll quit hard drugs, no coke, no heroin, no benzos. And they'll only drink alcohol and smoke weed, or they'll quit alcohol, or they'll quit whatever and only smoke weed. And like, you know, like for me, that never worked because marijuana, smoking weed always triggered that thing in my brain, right? So it's like, you know, it's like the same thing with alcohol, right? Like you smoke weed or you drink a little alcohol and you're kind of sitting there and you're like, you know, is this really enough? Like, is it like I said it was going to be fine before I did it. Now I'm kind of like, like I really want to just do some fucking cocaine, you know, like that's really what, you know, I really want to go get some dope, you know, or like you have a drink or two and it's like, you know, I really want to like actually get drunk, like sitting here catching a buzz is just not you know, it's like, no, I want to do this thing right, you know?
So it's kind of like when some people that really don't smoke cigarettes, they get to drinking, and then they're like, oh, they see you smoke. Let me get a cigarette.
Yeah.
You don't smoke. Nah, I only smoke every now and then when I'm drinking.
Yeah. It's like when you're drinking every day, so you smoke cigarettes every day.
When you get to drinking, you can smoke a pack.
Yeah.
It's funny you said that, right? Because you mentioned the zone, right?
Yep.
And I remember, like I said, when I originally started selling weed before I started smoking it, and that's what I was originally selling, was the Arizona.
Nick bags. Yeah. Like $5 little bags stuffed to the brim of like crap weed that was half sticks and half stems.
But nowadays, that's another thing that helped me be like, now or never, because with all the fentanyl.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know what I mean? Like, I remember sometimes rolling a blunt, taking 2 or 3 hits, and just being like knocked out. Like, I'm like, that couldn't have been that good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it has to looking at it like this got something else in it. Like, you know what I mean? Or my baby mom walking in the room and smelling it and be like, why that smells like that? And I'm like, what you mean? Why it smell? What it smell like? What? It smells weird. Like that smells weird. And I'm like, I'm smoking it, so I don't know what she's talking about. But
Yeah.
Right now for me, cigarettes, man.
Okay.
These cigarettes is, I'm getting better, but I think that the cigarettes is gonna be my biggest challenge.
You're ready to level up.
Yes.
I think nicotine is the hardest thing to quit in recovery. I quit heroin, I was good. And then it was like quitting nicotine, quitting cigarettes. It was like really, really hard, you know?
The longest I voluntarily quit was 8 months.
Okay.
Coming out of prison, in a halfway house, I could have started smoking right away, you know, cigarettes everywhere.
Yes.
And I was like, nah, I'm done with them. And every time I'd walk into this bathroom in the halfway house where everybody went and smoked that, I hated the smell. Sometimes I walk in and be like, oh, and walk out of that bathroom and go to the third floor bathroom and be like, oh my God, it smells. So that's another thing, right? I feel like people that don't smoke, when I'm around, they must be like, here comes the ashtray.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's weird. Like, I find myself sometimes, even if somebody's in my car that doesn't smoke, like, I won't smoke.
Yeah.
Or I remember asking somebody, you know, like, yo, you mind if I smoke a cigarette? And they looking at me like, this is your car. Like, what do you mean? Why you asking me? And I'm like, nah, because I know you don't smoke. You know, or like, my baby mom doesn't smoke, right? So every now and then, too, when I go to give her a kiss, and she'll be like, she'll do like a, and I could just imagine, you know, like me not smoking and just, I don't know, it just, so that's another thing too, like now that's making me be like, not only is it bad for my health, costs money, but just the fact of thinking like I said, you know, oh, here comes the ashtray.
You know, I think a lot about weed culture too, and the way the world changed, right? So back in the day, like when I was in high school, right, especially, you know, freshman year, being like known as a pothead and stuff like that, you were like so frowned upon and so looked down, and like weed was illegal. Like when we used to hang out at my buddy's house and, you know, we'd sell Nick bags on the, you know, front porch, and people would call us and pull up on their bikes or their cars or whatever, and we would sell them weed. And then like the cops would literally come, right? Because people were like, these people are selling drugs. The cops would come and shake us down. You know, cops would like throw you up against the car and treat you like, you know, you were selling crack cocaine out there, right? And now it's just such a, you know, such a thing in society where people just like smoke weed out in the open. Everything smells like weed all the time. You go to any sporting event, any type of big party, anything, people are just ripping blunts. And it's like this whole thing of like how culture has really changed around it, where like you would be the black sheep if you were the guy who like went out and hung out with some people who got high, that went to an event, and people were like, oh, look at this guy, you know what I mean? You'd be the high guy, right? Like, you know, it's really funny how like things do change in like society and culture. Same thing when we were younger, like everybody smoked cigarettes. Now it's kind of like, oh, like, you know, you're the black sheep if you smoke cigarettes. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this guy really smokes cigarettes. You know, like it's kind of wild how things do change in culture and society and things like that. Especially being in recovery. Like when I was like, I first like started hanging around recovery, and like this is like 10 years ago. every single person smoked cigarettes, right? People who come out of the meeting, every single person smoked cigarettes. Now people like don't even really smoke cigarettes like that anymore. You come out of a meeting, it's really like one or two people, and it's like, oh, this guy's smoking by the front step. Take that cigarette in the parking lot.
I think part of that is the vaping, right? So
Yes.
like the vaping is the new hip thing to do, right? And a lot of the younger crowd, when they see you smoking a cigarette, you must be, that's grandpa. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like who smokes cigarettes? You know what
Yes.
I mean? But it's funny you say that, right? Because my sponsor had once told me that, because he works in the community as well, right? And
Yep.
he told me that a teenager had overdosed on vaping.
Yes.
He went and purchased a vape from one of the vape shops, and it was laced with fentanyl.
Yep.
And I said, the vapes?
Mm-hmm.
What?
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy because I also have two teenage sons, 18 and 15, and
Okay.
they vape. And
That's tough.
that's like
Mm-hmm.
they because I know like when we started smoking cigarettes, right? When cigarettes first came out, they didn't have the surgery and warning on the side, right?
Yep.
Until people were addicted to them, then they
Yes.
put the warning on them. So I feel like that's gonna be the same thing with vapes, right? Once they got all the teenagers addicted in there, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Then they're gonna put the warnings on the vapes, or the vapes can cause this and this and this and this and that. By that time, they already got them.
It's kind of like I think that's like one of our biggest fears as a parent, as our children following in the footsteps of addiction that we did, right? So you look at this and you're like, you kind of feel fear. Like, I watched my kid do it with like candy and sweets, and it's like, please, please, and you're just like, kids beg for sweets, of course, always, especially if you're at the grocery store. Every kid wants to throw Oreos in the cart, but like you worry about that mentality in them, and you're like, do they have what I have?
The gene.
And you kind of like look at that and you're like, you feel that twinge of fear, right? Where you're like, the thing is thank God, so my dad was, in recovery for a big piece of my life, and I grew up around meetings and stuff. And I think that's what contributed to me getting sober so young. So like now, like, I'm pretty open. Like I don't tell my, almost 4-year-old daughter, like, hey, I used to be a heroin addict. Now I'm not, kind of thing, right? I don't piecemeal it like that, but I like, we grew up in a household, there's no alcohol in my house, and it's like, not because I don't want alcohol or people aren't allowed to drink in my house, but like, I don't really have any use for alcohol in my house, right? So it's something that's separated. There's no chaos in my house. You know what I mean? Like there's very little like yelling and screaming and everything like that. I believe in a very peaceful household, and like arguments shouldn't always be had in front of children. You know what I mean? And you look at that kind of stuff and like, nature versus nurture, right? Were you born an addict because your parents struggled with addiction, or did you have some of that but then grow up in an environment where addiction was so prevalent you became like them because of that? So, you look at nature versus nurture, like, do we as parents have the ability to set our kids up for success, right? Like all my friends are in recovery, right? Like we talk about healthy coping skills and try to instill that, loving kindness piece with my daughter, and be like, like, can I create a world where, she doesn't have to look to this to find peace in her life, right? Like a peaceful place without substances, and maybe they carry that on, and, and like I say, oh, I'm going to a meeting, and like, oh, Dad has to go to a meeting, and she kind of understands some of it, and like, as much as a 4-year-old can, right? But like, I haven't had that talk with her yet, but like, I don't know, like I'm pretty open about recovery, so I wonder,
Yeah, I have a 6-year-old, and
Yep.
as she gets older, she's gonna have a better understanding, right? The more she sees, she will know what it means now when I say I'm going to a meeting,
Yes.
and NA dances and things of that nature, cookouts, and things that we do in the community. Growing up, I didn't know anything about addiction. Like
Yeah.
I see what I see, but I don't know that this is an addiction. I don't know none of the facts. So my kids will grow up knowing, right? So if they decide on their own,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case is, curiosity, peer pressure, whatever,
Yep. Because you
they
can't
can't
control
say
them.
they didn't know, right?
Yes.
Because they grew up in this, community. So they know from a very, very young age, right?
Yep. So everything that you've gone through in your life, how do you utilize that today in your recovery?
Currently am an intervention specialist at Hartford Communities That Care. And I also come here very often to CCAR. And as a volunteer, I've been doing that here as long as I've been clean, so about a year now. I take everything that I've been through, since the household to the streets to jail life to being homeless at one point, and all of those things today, I use that as my resume, right? Because I found myself working with people that are in one of those categories,
Yep.
and it just helps me to understand, to be more just be more caring and not judgmental. um at one point in time before I became homeless, I was judgmental towards homeless people. I remember I used to sometimes drive by and see people out asking for money or just out in the streets, and especially if I seen that they look young,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, oh, they're homeless because they want to be homeless. They could go get a job. And after finding myself in the situation for 8 months, I ended up speaking with a lot of people at the shelter, including some veterans, and I came to the conclusion that this could be anybody. Some days you're up, some days you're down, right? Today, I walk into any room like God sent me, right? Like, I don't believe in coincidentals. If I ended up there, I ended up there for a reason, because at one point in time, I didn't understand why I went through what I went through.
Yes.
But today, I could look back on it and say, oh, okay, this is why these things happened in my life,
Mm-hmm.
so that I could be able to help somebody else in the same situation. I love it, man. I love what I do. It doesn't feel like work. I just can't wait to see what the future brings.
Yeah, dude, you're amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.